Funding for this program was provided by the UCLA Office of Instructional Development.
As I went walking that endless highway, I saw above me that endless skyway. I saw below me an endless valley where this land was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Islands, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. When I went walking, I saw a sign, and on that sign it said, no trespassing, but on the other side, it didn't say nothing. That side was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Islands, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me.
I roamed and rambled, I followed my footsteps on sparkling sands of her diamond deserts, while all around me a voice came sounding. This land was made for you and me.
This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Islands, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. Down in the city, by the shadow of the steeple, by the relief office, I saw my people, and they were hungry, and they were asking, is this land made for you and me? This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Islands, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. This land was made for you and me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. They will be performing after this talk at the reception, and they'll be performing in this very room on Sunday, May 15th, from I think it's 7 to 9 or something like that, and also at the Hammer Museum at 3:30 in the afternoon on April 23rd, if you'd like to hear more of them. Now, my topic today is who owns music and why you should care. And I selected this topic because we're all consumers of music. All of us work on a number of different projects at the same time, and this is just one of the ones that I've been working on, but I have been working hard on it for a while. We're also, I think most of us, producers of music, even if only in karaoke shows and in the shower. But it's a large subject, I want to say at the start, and one that can be approached from a number of different ways and different angles. It's a very big issue in some corners. The economies of several nations, like the United States, rest heavily on the existence of control over intellectual property, and also the lives of many people, including students who have been downloading music illegally, have been deeply affected by the enforcement of legislation regarding intellectual property. So it affects both nations and individuals in profound ways. And even though music is of far less economic importance than, say, pharmaceuticals, which have the same issues in them, music is, in a sense, out in front because everybody identifies with music. Only a few of us actually pirate or make illegal copies of pharmaceuticals, of legal pharmaceuticals. Now, my approach today stems from my training as an anthropologist and as an ethnomusicologist. We tend to look at ideas and then look around the world and see how other people think of them too in order to think through them and their implications. We listen very carefully and take what other people had to say very seriously. And I'm going to be doing that shortly. I'd like to stress that although copyright is a global issue, every nation has its own copyright legislation. And that means that there are some minimal international standards, but you can't really talk about world copyright at this point. We don't have a world or international copyright law or legislation. We do have a lot of tendencies and a lot of generalizations, and European and American concepts of copyright have in fact sort of been increasingly enforced as the model for in other parts of the world. I've been working on this topic for about 25 years, and I've stressed three things over and over again. So often my colleagues must be really tired of hearing them. One is that ethnomusicologists haven't paid enough attention to issues of copyright and local ideas of appropriate control and transmission. I've written, our discipline will be poorer for neglecting the rights and obligations associated with music, and we will have less and less to contribute to dialogue about contemporary music, which is increasingly shaped by the very processes we appear to be ignoring. I wrote that in 1992. I've also argued over and over again that international copyright agreements ignore the creative expression of a lot of the rest of the globe, and the rest of the human population is being forced to accept and adopt a set of copyright laws that look very much like what we have here, even though our own are imperfect. And this has affected especially indigenous groups. The title of a paper will sort of tell the whole story. Who got left out of the property grab again? Oral tradition, indigenous rights, and valuable old knowledge from 2005. And the third point I make over and over again is this issue is too important to leave to lawyers and legislators. Because what is legal is not always ethical, and what is ethical is not always legal. And therefore it needs the discussion of a very wide and ample part of the population of the world, and we need to be listening to each other. And the ethics are going to be shifting, they always do, and I've written that in Ethnomusicologists' Archives, Professional Organizations, and the Shifting Ethics of Intellectual Property. But the good thing is, things have changed. I won't say those same three things over and over again and leave you with them, because the last 5 years, things have changed a lot. In fact, if I'd been invited 5 years ago, that's probably what you would have heard. Today, I'm going to start with a parody song on a serious topic, and then I'm going to give a brief description of copyright law and concepts of person. And then I'm going to just briefly point out 4 cases: an indigenous secret music, reflection on a beach sandal, a Sardinian village, and sampling in urban popular music. And finally, I'll move to the conclusions. Now, this is a big topic. Just a part of it would make a 10-week course with no trouble at all. And so please forgive me if I'm either too general for what you know, or take you in places you really would rather not have to remember. Just ignore them and wait for the next topic to come along. I'm going to start with a song. The last song that the Bluegrass group did was actually This Land Is Your Land. It was written by Woody Guthrie. Most of you may know it. Woody Guthrie was a tremendous songwriter. I met him as a child and was totally awed by him. He wasn't terribly well at the time, but I actually was embarrassed to say that I liked his songs better than I liked the songs of my father's brother, and my father was standing right there. So, it was Woody Guthrie had made a tremendous impact on the lives of many musicians and songwriters, among them my Uncle Pete and Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan. And he wrote a song called This Land Is Your Land that a lot of you seem to know. It's a great song to parody, and parodies are legal in the United States. Copyright law protects us parodists, and so I got a song for you. This song is my song, that song is your song. You just sing your song, and I'll sing both songs. My song's a copyrighted song, your song's a folk song. My song belongs to only me. Don't clap. That's your part. So try it. This song is my song. That song is your song. You just sing your song, and I'll sing both songs. My song's a copyrighted song. Your song's a folk song. My song belongs to only me. Got it? Now this is going to be like a video game. We won't advance to the next level until you've sung that chorus right. This song is my song because I wrote it and I registered it at the Copyright Office. If you want to sing it, you've got to pay me. Don't even think of downloading it for free. Now's your chorus. This song is my song. That song is your song. You just sing your song, and I'll sing both songs. My song's a copyrighted song. Your song's a folk song. My song belongs. You're good. I'm going to step back just a little bit from the sort of knowledge wants to be free versus creators want to be paid sort of thing that we had in the cartoons at the very start. And start by saying that most societies have specific ways of controlling access to knowledge and for transmitting it. Our copyright law is just one of hundreds and maybe thousands of ways that different societies in the world have come up with for controlling access or ensuring that knowledge gets passed from one place to another. Ideas about rights over music are often closely related to a community's ideas about concepts of person, what a person is. They're also related to ideas of the sacred. What music is varies a lot from place to place, and what its meaning is. And it also has to do, in many places, with relations of power. And so every word in my title, who owns music, who is already very complicated because it could be an individual or a person or a god, and no one has really quite figured out what the life of a god plus 70 years will actually end up being. But I think we need to consider it, because a lot of music around the world is actually revealed and belongs to the revealer, not the person to whom it was revealed. Furthermore, Euro-American copyright law, our own copyright law, is intricately related to 19th century European and American ideas about the individual, concept of person, what a person is, about creativity, which actually was in the 19th century especially thought to be related to individual genius, and also to the process of urbanization and the capitalist market system. All of those really flowered in the 19th century especially, along with the establishment of new kinds of copyright and international copyright declarations. Those that were developed in Europe are now applied to the whole rest of the world, whether or not their ideas in the 19th century had anything to do with those of Europe. Copyright definition. Copyright is a temporary monopoly on a fixed original work. Temporary is important because copyright doesn't last. After it's gone, things cease to be covered by it. It covers, and in England it began with the development of printing and is related very clearly to commerce, so it is in the United States. In other parts of Europe, related to the Enlightenment and the French Revolution, the focus on the individual and the state, it became much more sort of related to authors, the rights of authors, and they have such things as moral rights that the United States didn't even consider for a very long time. A work to be copyrighted must be original, has to be fixed, has to have some identifiable creator, and in the United States, the constitutional objective of copyright is to stimulate creativity by rewarding it for a time and then allowing that information to be used freely. Now that's why it's so important that Woody Guthrie says, my song's a copyrighted song, yours is a folk song, so I can sing both of ours, but you can't sing mine. After a certain period of time, which is now passed for that song, you can. But if from beginning the ideas of monopolies on ideas has been conflicted from the very start, and so what we take as being obvious and logical, that ideas belong to people and they're like property, is not what James Madison was thinking about in 1788. He wrote that monopolies are sacrifices of the many to the few, When the power is in the few, it is natural for them to sacrifice the many for their own partialities and corruptions. But in spite of this, Madison was one of the formulators of the part of the US Constitution that actually deals with copyright. It says the US Constitution empowers the US Congress to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. That's what's in the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson's ideas on this topic actually are even more famous. And I'm going to read from a section of a letter he wrote in 1813 because it reads as if it were written yesterday. He who receives an idea from me receives instruction himself without lessening mine, as he who lights his taper at mine receives light without darkening mine. That ideas should freely spread from one to another over the globe for the moral and mutual instruction of man and improvement of his condition seems to have been peculiarly and benevolently designed by nature when she made them, like fire expansible over all space, without lessening their density at any point, and like the air in which we breathe, move, and have our physical being, incapable of confinement or exclusive appropriation. I read it for two reasons. One is, I think it's important to recognize it's not changing technology that's making us think that ideas actually are free and should be freely exchanged. That's a philosophical position, and it's been around for hundreds of years. And so we need to be cautious about the technological clamor, the technology is requiring it. It didn't require it. It might have taken 3 months to get a letter from one continent to another in 1813, but it still got there, and ideas were still circulating. And the question of whether they should freely circulate, be restricted in circulation, and how they should circulate has been the debate ever since. The other is that it focuses on transmission, lighting a taper, passing a song from one to another. It's time to switch topics. Are you ready? Some called me an anarchist, others called me a commie, and for my melodies I borrowed freely. Sometimes I changed a tune, sometimes I didn't. Public domain belongs to you and me. Now your chorus. This song is my song, that song is your song. You just sing your song, and I'll sing both songs. My song's a copyrighted song, your song's a folk song. My song belongs to only me. Now, the reason he could say that, and the reason Woody Guthrie could borrow all those melodies from other places, is that after a certain amount of time, the copyright expires and anybody can use something for anything. The public domain you can think of as a kind of a commons or a shared ocean that you can go to and take from anytime you want, and the rivers leading into it are the copyrighted things that are controlled for a certain period of time. Now, the thing is, when the Europeans decided what was copyrightable, they left out folklore, they left out a whole lot of intangible heritage, and they left out the knowledge of a lot of people. They've privileged the knowledge of urban dwellers who were literate, who were part of the market system, and therefore would benefit and enjoy the protection of copyright and the money that came with it. And this included in copyright are new works by literate authors or composers, published and sold to literate readers or audiences. Usually they're urban dwellers, and the publishers are granted limited term monopolies so they can make some money. Excluded were old works, non-literate authors or composers who passed traditions largely orally, and usually rural dwellers and colonized peoples, fairly systematically. And their works are considered not copyrightable, by definition not copyrightable, but in the public domain for everyone to use as they wish. Copyright law, as I said, is related to power, and it's very clear in the establishment of what gets covered and what doesn't get covered, and that's a crucial point that I've stressed. But such attitudes aren't found everywhere. I roamed and rambled in the Australian desert. I met a man whose music was secret. He told me it was wrong to pass on his song to women, children, or anyone of another clan. This song is my song, that song is your song. You just sing your song, and I'll sing both songs. My song's a copyrighted song, your song's a folk song. My song belongs to only me. Many indigenous peoples argue that they weren't consulted in copyright legislation and its establishment in the countries in which they find themselves, and they thus object to the provisions of the law in very fundamental ways. Not all music is meant to be commercial. The idea behind copyright and intellectual property is that people want their ideas to circulate. Some ideas are really not supposed to circulate to everybody, and that's true especially in parts of indigenous Australia and the island Pacific. There, relations among social groups are established and maintained partly by restrictions on the circulation of knowledge. You're supposed to know some things, and you're not supposed to know another. So you're supposed to know what your group, gender, age, clan, and lineage know, perhaps, but you're specifically not supposed to be able to learn anything about other peoples, the other gender, the other groups and clans. And how does this work now in an era of increasing consolidation and computerization? What do you do if you have all the knowledge of a community in one computer? How do you access it? Has technology left behind the possibility of actually having this kind of targeted transmission? And the answer is, actually, I think that we're in the process in our own use of computers in becoming more and more discreet about the way that we let people access our data. And we better, as you may have read in the paper today. We are in a process of trying to figure out how we're going to restrict access to knowledge about us. And that's very much what a project that Kimberly Kristen was doing with the Pinchanjanjara Council in Australia. They were developing a computer program where every member logs in, has a personal PIN, and then gets access to that part of the knowledge that's appropriate to their age, clan, and gender. And so they can learn from that site everything that's appropriate, and they can't see any other parts. As they grow older, the universe of what's available to them opens further, but is continued to be restricted. So there the computer is being used to, in fact, continue a system of restriction of access, but not just restriction of access, focus on transmission. The Australians have been there for thousands, maybe tens of thousands of years. And if you have an oral tradition, it's actually especially efficient if people know which part of that tradition they have to learn so they can pass it on. It may be that in the future we will have similar kinds of restrictions on access to our own knowledge. But the United Nations has passed a declaration on the rights of Indigenous peoples, and this declaration reads that Indigenous peoples have the right to maintain, control, protect, and develop their cultural heritage, traditional knowledge, and traditional cultural expressions, as well as the manifestations of their sciences, technologies, and cultures, including human and genetic resources, seeds, medicines, knowledge, and the properties of fauna and flora, oral traditions, literatures, design, sports, and traditional games, and visual and performing arts. They also have the right to maintain, control, and protect and develop their intellectual property over such cultural heritage, traditional knowledge, and traditional cultural expressions. Should that become a part of the US copyright law, it will be a major change in the way we will be dealing with people's knowledge. And I'd alert you to that because President Obama signed that, or I think we voted in favor of it fairly recently, and it may be coming. Now, the issue is not only protection. There are other things that happen as a law spreads around the globe, and I am going to sing one more song right now. Out in the villages, in the shadows of the steeples, by the Copyright Office, I see many people, and they're confused, and they are asking which rights belong to you and to me, and you sing, this song is my song, that song is your song, you just sing your song, and I'll sing both songs. This song's a copyrighted song, your song's a folk song, this song belongs to only me. I'm going to stop for an advertisement. Let's see if it plays. Spacebar. Here we go.
JP.
So when a Brazilian supermodel and a Brazilian Indian society meet up, interesting things happen. This actually happened in the village that my wife and I have been working in for about 40 years, which is in the Amazon region in Mato Grosso, right about there. And the group is called the Suya. Now they like to be called Kinseji, which is an old name they also use for themselves. And they live there, and their village looked like that in 1972 when I first went. The village now looks like that. That's the village that they were singing in the advertisement. And that's us. Also, things change in 30 years in many ways. Some of us do get bigger and a few things like that. So, not all indigenous knowledge is secret. The Suya knowledge is not secret, but it can be contentious. When supermodel Giselle Bündchen approached an NGO and said she wanted to launch a set of sandals, a series of sandals using indigenous designs, and would they help her find a group that she could negotiate with to use their designs, the NGO, which is the Instituto Socioambiental, an excellent NGO in Brazil, led her to the Suya Indians in Mato Grosso, Brazil. And I know about all this thanks to anthropologist Marcela Coelho de Souza of the University of Brasilia, who happened to be in the village at the time. Now, the Suya thought, sure, they wouldn't mind licensing their designs for $300,000 to these sandals, and they wouldn't mind help in figuring out all the paperwork and things like that. But then the NGO said, but are these designs really yours? Oh. The Suya, like other Jay-speaking groups, actually have created their culture by taking captives and learning the songs of captives from group after group after group. They've met other groups and danced with them and then taken their designs and gone and done the dances at home. Their whole history, as they see it, has been an accumulation of new things taken from evil enemies. Suddenly they were faced with, well, which of all of our body paint is in fact ours? So they sat down and they thought, well, maybe there was one kind of body paint we used before we ever met the Brazilians, and what did it look like? And 2 days later, they designed it on someone, decided, yes, that was it. That's ours. It doesn't look like anybody else's. And so they did this, and they're very happy with it. But it led to a major rethinking of who they were and how they expressed themselves. They stopped using certain types of body paint. They stopped making certain artifacts completely that they'd first encountered hundreds of years ago in other groups and were still recognizably those of other groups. They began to purge their language of foreign words that were in other indigenous languages. And I got there, and there's this tremendous preoccupation with what is ours and what are our rights to it. And this was all fomented by something that was completely indigenous and positive. This was completely positive on the part of the NGO, but it led to a tremendous amount of concern in the community itself. And that's what I found almost everywhere, is people really are confused and concerned. Even when the intentions are good, copyright laws can have a profound effect on many other things besides just the objects that they are protecting or enabling. And the Suya are still working on exactly how to work on that, but they have developed some entirely new artifacts that no one has ever made anything like before, that they are now saying are theirs, and they're selling them. And they are inventing new forms of body design that also are brand new. Their music, on the other hand, also comes from all these other people, and so they went upriver and they said, look, we sing your songs. Is it all right if we sing your songs, do your ceremonies? We've been doing them for 150 years. And since we captured all those women, remember them? And so and so and so and so and so and so and so. And the group said, you've been singing it for so long that you sing it differently than we do. And so it's okay if you sing it, because it's not the same anyway. And so they got permission from a major chief up there, so they're totally unconcerned now about continuing those songs. And what they say is that the folks upriver forgot the songs, and they're the only ones who know them right. And so I think probably everyone's happy with that solution, but at least they were able to do that. Imagine if the people had said, no, you got to pay us every time you want to sing those at night in the village. Sardinia. I went to Sardinia and found the same kind of confusion. Different Sardinian villages have different local styles of male a cappella singing. And they consider those to be the property of the village. And yet, today, because of the popularity of intangible cultural heritage and tourism and everything else, other people in other villages are recording their style and making compilation recordings. So they're trying to figure out, how can we stop this? And they invited people from the collection agency in Italy, and from the lawyers and ethnomusicologists and singers, and a whole bunch of singers, thank goodness. And we couldn't, there is no way, actually. At least the lawyers and people in the collection agencies couldn't think of a way. I had a suggestion, but that's less relevant than that it's not only indigenous communities that feel that they have a right to something, and that right is not, in fact, possible to manifest under the current laws. So what's happening there are some interesting things happening in the World Intellectual Property Organization. Its Intergovernmental Committee on TCE and EOF, that's traditional cultural expressions and expressions of folklore. This group says their objective is to meet the actual needs of communities, to be guided by the aspirations and expectations expressed directly by indigenous peoples and communities, and by traditional and other cultural communities, and respect their rights under national and international law, and contribute to the welfare and sustainable economic, cultural, environmental, and social development of such peoples and communities. What's different here, and what is really quite groundbreaking, is that it's not restricting it to indigenous peoples who already have rights recognized to a certain extent, but it's including in that all kinds of other communities. Now, that's going to shake up copyright legislation a little bit if that actually gets implemented. It's still in discussion. There's another problem, and we're getting to the end of the problems. In New York City, I met a DJ who assembled samples in a new way. He was sued and punished in a big way. How to create new songs for you and me, try it. This song is my song, that song is your song. You just sing your song, and I'll sing my songs. My song's a copyrighted song, your song's a folk song. This song belongs to only me. There are other ways to think about creativity, and I think we're beginning to see this more and more. Seeing creations not as individual acts of genius, but actually as a cumulative process with many different contributors that actually are contributing to the final project, whether it be a composition in music, or some open source software, or open source software, or Wikipedia, or other sorts of projects that we're involved in. The post-19th century ideas of what a person is are a little different, and of how creativity works is different. And certainly many urban forms of popular music today, and many of the things that my students are doing on their computers, mixing and bringing in different kinds of music to create things, is very different from an earlier idea of how composition is done. And hip-hop artists suffered especially from reprisals against their sampling of very small bits of copyrighted music sounds. This got easier in some respects, but never really was resolved. And tiny distinctions in sounds and sound structure are being debated in courts. In fact, in my field, in the field of ethnomusicology, and I think in musicology too, the profound ideas of what is the minimal music idea, whether something is identical or different, these aren't being decided in the classroom. These are being decided in the law courts. While that may be good for expert witnesses, it is a strange way to run a conceptual field, where the decisions are actually being decided by people who are not necessarily spending the rest of their lives working with that topic. And here too, there are ways to facilitate the sharing of musical creativity. One example is Creative Commons licenses. They're not perfect, but they're used by Wikipedia. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Creative Commons, it doesn't require a change in copyright law. Copyright laws can stay the same. Instead, once you've done something new, then you can decide how you want it distributed. And you can say, well, I want it to enter the public domain right away, not 70 years after I'm dead. And you can take out that kind of license. You can say, well, I want anybody to use it for anything, but I want it registered that I came up with the idea first, but they can use it. That's the way I have actually copyrighted my parody of This Land Is Your Land. You're welcome to change any verse you like. So suddenly we have different options. The law doesn't change. We don't require Congress to do anything. but we can create mechanisms that actually become then internationally agreed upon possibilities for changing the way that we create and for allowing that and encouraging the changes in the way we create. And by way of conclusion, I'm not a government, I'm not a company, I'm just finishing my little homily. What can we do to answer their questions? Which rights belong to them and to you? Now watch the chorus is different this time. If that song is your song and this song is my song, perhaps we should sing together and try to get along. Around the world, people are working to create practices that will work for you and me. You better try that again. If that is your song and this is my song, perhaps we should sing together and try to get along. Around the world, people are working to create practices that will work for you and me. In sum, things have changed in 20 years. Ethnomusicologists are now studying the impact on copyright law of copyright law on musicians and of music very systematically and well. Among them is my colleague Helen Rees here. There's increased criticism of the Euro-American intellectual property law and trade agreements from other nations that are pushing back against them. The United Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples addresses some indigenous concerns that have been around for a long time. They haven't been solved, but at least they're out there. And the World Intellectual Property Organization, which was famous for developing the international standards for formal copyright, is now also working on beginning to address the traditional knowledge and expressions of folklore. And the public is mobilizing around these things. There are protests in front of the Supreme Court by both sides, which you can find out yourself. And this is important to you. Why? Well, you're all creators of and consumers of knowledge. In fact, we probably create and consume more knowledge than the average people, because that's what we spend a whole lot of our time doing. The world is changing, and our ethics and laws are going to have to be changing with them. I don't know how, I don't know when, but things are changing. The power orientation in the world is changing, and inevitably, other things are going to change with it. Among them, I suspect, the way knowledge is protected and also transmitted. And how things change very much are up to us. We aren't the only people to decide it, but we're certainly one of the parties to be involved. Why? Because we read and we write. And copyright law, as we know it, comes from our own history and contains certain philosophical principles and economic policies that are part of that history, and they will probably change. The legislation created by Congress can always be changed. I wouldn't hold my breath. I would change my ethics first. Is there something we should do? I don't think there's any single best practice if you look at things around the world. We're neither gods nor legislators, but we do know how to do research, and we know how to talk with people, we know how to listen to them, we can respect what they say, and we can write about it. We can learn about intellectual property registration and vigor from many sources. It's important to learn from beyond the source of the people who own copyright. It's important to look at all of the different aspects of it, as I have tried to at least begin to present it to you here. We can also teach our students about the subject and about the ethical implications of claiming access or restricting access. And I think we can listen to all kinds of musicians around the world and really listen to what they have to say about their desires for their own future, for their own music, their intentions for the traditions that they value and that they are learning and creating within. And we can also, I think in very practical ways, help musicians discover and evaluate their options to protect or not to protect things that they value from other people using them. Now, they may want everybody to use it. When I took over Folkways Records, the first things I did was I went to a concert, and my Uncle Pete was there, and he said, "Tony, come over here, I've got this idea for what you should do with Folkways." He said, "Look, put on every single album cover. Make as many copies of this album as you want and give it to everybody that you know. And just, if they want to see the original, they should go back and find the original. And the liner notes, they should always try to find." And I said, "Pete, well, it was a wonderful, idealistic idea, but I would have been sued immediately by 99% of the other artists on the label who actually were valued the small living they could make on it. But the idea is that you could, in fact, imagine things differently, and you could try to start something that dramatically differently was a very enlightening idea for someone who was just taking over a record label. So you can listen to musicians, there was one, and listen to other musicians. Ella Jenkins was another who was very proud of her songwriting and wanted it recognized. And you can help them. You can also write. We write and we talk. And then we should stop talking and we should eat and listen to bluegrass, which is coming up soon. Thank you very much. Now, thank you. It's lovely to have a friendly audience. Thank you for singing. We actually have a few minutes for questions, so if you could bring up the house lights, I'd be happy to address any questions you may have. You just have to do one thing. You have to wait for the microphone to arrive after you've had the idea. Don't just suddenly shout it out. Does anybody have a question? This is a big field. You can ask from any angle. Yes, there's a question right there. Yes.
Hello. May I harken back to Article 31 that you showed before? Does this article contain any exceptions for situations where knowledge is used, for instance, to subjugate women?
Actually, it doesn't, as it stands, actually, because it's a general statement. On the other hand, I found it in the United Nations documents, anything that goes against the Declaration of Human Rights has to be modified by that. So the short answer is yes. I mean, in fact, because among the other things in that declaration is a statement saying the Declaration of Human Rights actually applies. So it's true that if we let everybody do what they want to do, there are a lot of unfortunate things that might happen. On the other hand, I think we also have to recognize the differences in approach to things like knowledge especially. So is it an imposition to say that men shouldn't be learning what women know and that women shouldn't be learning what men know? I think we have to some extent look at what people are saying in the community about that, because that's the way that they've been passing their knowledge for thousands of years. Yes, another question, yes.
Do you have any idea?
Wait till it started out.
Do you have any idea what the status of copyright in Sharia law?
That's a wonderful question, and I haven't the faintest idea. Do you? No, I don't, but actually, I know now what I'm going to be doing when I get back to my office. That's the fun thing about giving talks, is people ask you questions you actually never, ever thought of. Yes, can you pass the microphone in to Robert?
Hi, Tony. Wonderful lecture. I'm asking a question like my colleague Dick Lanham and I were chatting about a moment ago. It seems to me that the basic thrust or direction of your comments is to extend copyright into indigenous and traditional areas. Won't that, in fact, only extend and exacerbate the whole problems of the market economy and make things potentially more contentious than they already are? And it seems that there's a whole other direction. I mean, look at Disney and the kind of tricks they pull on copyright and so forth. Isn't there a direction which is trying to take the European-American model and make it less stringent, make things more open and accessible? What is your stance to that direction? It seems to be a totally different pole from the one that you were sharing with us.
That's a really good point. And of course, I'm somewhat torn on the issue, because it's always seemed to me that if the Beatles and Disney can make money on their creations, then indigenous peoples and everybody else should also have the same right if they want to, right? And so on the one hand, you're right, that's exactly what I was arguing in certain cases. On the other hand, I'm also saying that the copyright law itself is probably going to change. Whether it's going to change, and exactly how that's going to work, I don't know. But it seems to me it will probably change as a result. If everybody's knowledge is recognized, then we will probably have some very different ways of allowing access and lack of access. And it may be that then something more like Creative Commons comes along that actually makes 99% of the knowledge more available, and the little bits that people really care about, not.
Thank you. I want to ask specifically about the issue of fieldwork records. And because I've seen that many of the issues that archives have brought about, it's concerning repatriation, for example, or what to do with musics collected on the fields. And I wish if you can talk about like your views on ethic conduct in the fieldworks, and I don't think like you address like the power differentials of the ethnographer in the field.
Okay, yes, I think about this a lot. There's a long history of ethnographic recording, of recording other people's sounds, not for commercial reasons, but for research, that began in about 1890 with Jesse Walter Fuchs in the United States, anyway, recording the Passamaquoddy. And that continues to this day. As ideas and ethics have changed, and those are the changing ethics I referred to in my paper, we have begun to realize we need to make much more explicit what we're going to use it for, and to make the research far more collaborative and interactive than it was originally, when we would put the machine down and say, well, sing something into it. And that has left us with archives filled with recordings that actually we don't have permission to use, and the archives don't have permissions to use. And that's one of the challenges of running an archive, is no one was asking those questions 100 years ago, or even 75 years ago, or even 50 years ago, and sometimes not even 20 years ago. And so we're filled with materials that we have to then talk with the communities that made them about making them available. There is a power differential, and when I was with the Suya, you could say, well, there was a power differential. I was coming from outside. They were told when I got there, my introduction was, and he's an American, and the Americans are very fierce. They're firebombing Vietnam villages. That was quite an introduction. And, but actually, when I was in the field, they had the power. They decided whether or not they would record anything. In fact, there are some things they never recorded, because they said they were too dangerous. It wasn't me that they were worried about, but if any of their enemies heard them, they would be attacked immediately and annihilated. So there were some things that they would never, ever record, and they were quite clear on that. Since then, I've worked out with them exactly what I can use and what I can't use. I think one of the ways they've learned to negotiate this is actually we've co-produced a couple of projects that have worked fairly well. But we have a real challenge in archives. We work with representatives of communities the best we can to figure out what material can be used by researchers, what material can be used for dissemination on the internet, and what material should just stay very quietly where it is until somebody from that community wants it again. Archives are very important, I've found. When I was running the archives in Indiana, indigenous and non-indigenous groups kept on coming, asking for the music, not to have it, but to be able to use it. No one ever in my history running archives has ever asked for the master tape, master cylinders back. They aren't worth anything, it's the sound on them that is. Does that help? Does that sort of address some of the issues? There's another question here.
Okay, that Giselle Bundchen commercial.
Yes.
It actually made me think of Star Trek and the Prime Directive, where you're not supposed to interfere with another culture because you introduce your ideas and you could actually do damage to that culture. I'm sorry to bring up Star Trek.
Oh, of course. No, listen. We all think of Star Trek.
So I'm wondering, so you introduced this idea of ownership that really disrupted their way of thinking about their own cultural artifacts, where they started to wonder, who owns this? Who's the owner? And
right.
So do you consider that you damaged their approach to their own culture?
Let me make it clear. I didn't do that.
Okay,
no, really,
I'm sorry.
It was the NGO that did it, and they didn't ask me first. I have a good relationship with them, but they didn't ask me first. And they were trying to do something very good. The thing is, Star Trek works in distant planets when the only people arriving are the people on the ship, right? What happens in central Brazil is, in addition to the NGO and the ethnomusicologists and anthropologists, you have soybean farmers, you have bounty hunters that are killing people, you have weird things happening with the Air Force, there are all kinds of other agencies, and you have a national policy that's basically capitalist and is exploiting the territory and would like to have all of the indigenous territory to exploit too. So with all that going on, you're not really doing very much damage trying to go in and help them make some money out of some of that, because it's all this other stuff going on. So I never felt that by teaching them how to sing "This Land Is Your Land," which they also know, that I was actually destroying their culture in any way, because they were also, of course, now able to, they have parabolic antennas behind the houses. They can now listen to anything they want. And that they even like this Ländische Urland sung in a foreign language is just another example of how they like to get enemy songs of people they sort of captured for a while and sing them. So I respect their vision and their militance quite a lot, actually. And I think I'm not terribly worried about damaging it myself. I'm very worried about some of the other things damaging it, the agrotoxins and things like that in water. Anything else? From this side. Can we do this side first? Yeah.
I have a question about the ethics of copyright. You're saying that the ethics and the law don't always coincide. And in the humanities especially, we are running into problems right now with copyright. Can we share information with our students? Can we have them listen to a song? Can we make it available to them outside of class? And especially now that you are looking at copyright extending into indigenous domains, do you fear that 20 years from now, you will have to pay to play a song for your students or someone else? And how do you have any ideas about how we should be thinking about that as academics, as educators and teachers?
Well, I think we need to think about it, and I think we need to talk about it. I don't think we should make the university the subject of a whole lot of lawsuits. I mean, there are some things, we are also in a context that we don't control all of. And if, in fact, every time someone, are you flashing a sign at me? Okay, if, in fact, someone ever has to pay the Suya Indians in Brazil to play their music, I wouldn't be so sad. In fact, I created a website called, with other folks at Smithsonian, called Smithsonian Global Sound, whose purpose was to get archives around the world to post the parts of those archives for which they had permissions and could direct half of the money that they received for the download of it or license of it back to the actual individual who made it, because I think that one of the reasons that we have what we call this loss of traditional culture around the world is actually a whole lot of people around the world who are creating aren't making any money or getting any recognition, and so people are having to do popular music and write new songs in order to get money and things like that. Whereas, in fact, I always thought that if actually money were going back for their own traditions that they valued, and they would get not just the money, which might be small, but the respect and sort of symbolic power that it entails, it would actually be good for them. So I've been working on that side too, because I think there is a huge issue of fairness, and I'd like to address that issue of fairness even as I would like also to address some of the other issues as well. I think the fairness issue is tremendously important, and we can do it ourselves as ethnomusicologists, and so we have to pay a few pennies more. I'm not sure that's the worst thing that could ever happen. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, so the last question. Does that mean one more? One more question. Do you have a microphone?
I've got a microphone.
Well, somebody already has a microphone. We have two people with microphones, so.
Okay.
Can we finish up with the two with microphones?
I have a microphone.
Microphone, speak up, and then Professor, do you have a microphone? Okay.
It's getting easier and easier to steal copies of what should be protected material. What about enforcement? It seems to me a law is only as good as its enforcement. Are there new ways to enforce copyright laws, or is enforcement falling behind and just doomed to being outstripped by the ease of copying?
I don't know, because for that you have to look at a particular nation's copyright law. There is a lot of enforcement going on. I don't think it's doomed at all, and I think part of the success of, and part of what's going to happen is going to be determined not just by enforcement, it's going to be determined by other options. And so I think the immediate success of iTunes shifted a whole lot of things in the use and access to music. A whole lot of people didn't mind paying for it, 90 Cents Institute. The license, the push and the pull, the licensing of sort of the paying for music by a monthly fee or something like that is also shifting. I think we're in a process here. I don't think we're at the end of a process. Some of the parts of it I like, some of it I don't like, but it's a process that's going on. And I can't predict it, and it's going to depend a lot on what happens. I mean, who invents another new way to get music, and not just to get it, but of course to use it, and the ability to reuse it, and the ability to create new things from it. I'm more concerned by our freezing of items and making them unchangeable, actually, in terms of how music is used, than I am in terms of whether I can get it or not. I think people have always used musical ideas to create new musical ideas. And if we create a system that's so rigid that you can't do that, then I think we really will have done a great injustice to the creative arts in general. And there was one other, do you have a mic? Or was there somebody else with a mic? Okay, then Professor Rossi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if the recent technology is making it very hard to copyright things. I'm a musician. For the last 5 years, everything I performed appeared on YouTube or online, and without my knowledge, I gave up on saying, don't copy, or my students copy everything every time when I perform. Maybe here too, we have technologies easy to copy, easy to put online. So is that an interesting thing, a good thing to celebrate or something to be concerned about?
It's a good thing to reflect on, and that's what universities are for. And I don't mean that flippantly. I mean, really, that is a good thing to reflect on. And I teach a course in the music industry. The music industry has changed in 400 years several times in extremely dramatic ways in which people who had fortunes lost them, and entirely new ways of things happened, and it was reinvented. So I don't know what's going to happen. I think it is good to reflect on it, but it may be that people are not going to make their money on their compositions in the future, but will make them on their performances. Or they'll make their money on their compositions only when they're used in feature films and other sorts of formal events where that happens. And they may even be happy that that happens. But we'll have to see, and we can talk about it. This is Professor Rossi from my own department, and one of the nice things we can do is we can talk about it for the next year or so. Anyway, thank you all very much for coming. You don't have to talk about it for next year.
Videocassette copies of this program are available for purchase from the UCLA Instructional Media Library. Call toll-free 1-877-958-2200. Additional information about the people, places, and ideas discussed in this program is available at our website, www.webcast.ucla.edu.